Book 1, Chapter 2, The Worship of the Dead. This belief very soon gave rise to certain rules of conduct. Since the dead had need of food and drink, it appeared to be a duty of the living to satisfy this need. The care of supplying the dead with sustenance was not left to the caprice or to the variable sentiments of men. It was obligatory. Thus, a complete religion of the dead was established, whose dogmas might soon be effaced, but whose rites endured until the triumph of Christianity. The dead were held to be sacred beings. To them the ancients applied the most respectful epithets that could be thought of. They called them good, holy, happy. For them they had all the veneration that man can have for the divinity whom he loves or fears. In their thoughts, the dead were gods. This sort of apotheosis was not the privilege of great men. No distinction was made among the dead. Cicero says, "Our ancestors desired that the men who had quitted this life should be counted in the number of the gods." It was not necessary to have been even a virtuous man. The wicked man, as well as the good man, became a god. But he retained in the second life all the bad inclinations which had tormented him in the first. The Greeks gave to the dead the name of subterranean gods. In Aeschylus, a son thus invokes his deceased father: "O thou who art a god beneath the earth." Euripides says, speaking of Alcestis, "Near her tomb the passer-by will stop and say, 'This is now a thrice happy divinity.'" The Romans gave to the dead the name of manes. "Render to the manes what is due them," says Cicero. "They are men who have quitted this life. Consider them as divine beings." The tombs were the temples of these divinities, and they bore the sacramental inscription Dis manibus, and in Greek, Thais Kathonios. There the god lived beneath the soil, manesque sepulti, says Virgil. Before the tomb there was an altar for the sacrifices, as before the temples of the gods. We find this worship of the dead among the Hellenes, among the Latins, among the Sabines, among the Etruscans. We also find it among the Aryas of India. Mention is made of it in the hymns of the Rig Veda. It is spoken of in the laws of Manu as the most ancient worship among men. We see in this book that the idea of metempsychosis had already passed over this ancient belief, even before the religion of Brahma was established. And still beneath the worship of Brahma, beneath the doctrine of metempsychosis, the religion of the souls of ancestors still subsists, living and indestructible, and compels the author of the laws of Manu to take it into account, and to admit its rules into the sacred book. Not the least singular thing about this strange book is that it has preserved the rules relative to this ancient belief, whilst it was evidently prepared in an age when a belief entirely different had gained the ascendancy. This proves that much time is required to transform a human belief, and still more to modify its exterior forms and the laws based on it. At the present day even, after so many ages of revolutions, the Hindus continue to make offerings to their ancestors. This belief and these rites are the oldest and the most persistent of anything pertaining to the Indo-European race. This worship was the same in India as in Greece and Italy. The Hindu had to supply the manas with the repast, which was called sradda. Let the master of the house make the sradda with rice, milk, roots, and fruits in order to procure for himself the goodwill of the manas. The Hindu believed that at the moment when he offered this funeral repast, the manas of his ancestors came to seat themselves beside him and took the nourishment which was offered them. He also believed that this repast afforded the dead great enjoyment. When the sradda is made according to the rites, the ancestors of the one who offers it experience unbounded satisfaction. Thus the Aryas of the East had, in the beginning, the same notions as those of the West, relative to man's destiny after death. Before believing in metempsychosis, which supposes an absolute distinction between the soul and the body, they believed in the vague and indefinite existence of man, invisible but not immaterial, and requiring of mortals nourishment and offerings. The Hindu, like the Greek, regarded the dead as divine beings who enjoyed a happy existence, but their happiness depended on the condition that the offerings made by the living should be carried to them regularly. If the sradda for a dead person was not offered regularly, his soul left its peaceful dwelling and became a wandering spirit who tormented the living. So that, if the dead were really gods, this was only whilst the living honored them with their worship. The Greeks and Romans had exactly the same belief. If the funeral repast ceased to be offered to the dead, they immediately left their tombs and became wandering shades that were heard in the silence of the night. They reproached the living with their negligence, or they sought to punish them by afflicting them with diseases or cursing their soil with sterility. In a word, they left the living no rest till the funeral feasts were re-established. The sacrifice, the offering of nourishment, and the libation restored them to the tomb and gave them back their rest and their divine attributes. Man was then at peace with them. If a deceased person, on being neglected, became a malignant spirit, one who was honored became, on the other hand, a tutelary deity. He loved those who brought him nourishment. To protect them, he continued to take part in human affairs, and frequently played an important part there. Dead though he was, he knew how to be strong and active. The living prayed to him and asked his support and his favors. When anyone came near a tomb, he stopped and said, "Subterranean God, be propitious to me." We can judge of the power which the ancients attributed to the dead by this prayer which Electra addresses to the manas of her father. "Take pity on me and on my brother Orestes. Make him return to this country. Hear my prayer, O my father. Grant my wishes, receiving my libations." These powerful gods did not give material aid only, for Electra adds, "Give me a heart more chaste than my mother's, and purer hands." Thus the Hindu asks of the manas, that in his family the number of good men may increase, and that he may have much to give. These human souls deified by death were what the Greeks called demons, or heroes. The Latins gave them the name of lares, manas, genii. Our ancestors believed, says Apuleius, that the manas, when they were malignant, were to be called larvae. They called them lares when they were benevolent and propitious. Elsewhere we read, Genius and lar is the same being, so our ancestors believed. And in Cicero, those that the Greeks called demons we call lares. This religion of the dead appears to be the oldest that has existed among this race of men. Before men had any notion of Indra or of Zeus, they adored the dead. They feared them and addressed them prayers. It seems that the religious sentiment commenced in this way. It was perhaps while looking upon the dead that man first conceived the idea of the supernatural, and began to have a hope beyond what he saw. Death was the first mystery, and it placed man on the track of other mysteries. It raised his thoughts from the visible to the invisible, from the transitory to the eternal, from the human to the divine.